Today I present on the Transportation Sustainability Framework developed by myself, Kohan Dolcy, and Dr. Trevor Townsend of the University of the West Indies. The presentation will cover the objectives, our approach, what sustainable transport means in our context, the framework development, and then we will introduce the Transportation Sustainability Framework, draw a conclusion, and present our recommendations. Our objectives were to identify the sustainability indicators and evaluation techniques applicable to transportation systems, to develop a framework for the monitoring and evaluation of the sustainability of the road transportation system, and to provide recommendations to improve its sustainability. We started off by identifying the problem, then we conducted a desktop review looking at the sustainability requirements, criteria, and indicators, particularly those used for transportation systems. Then we developed the framework and sought feedback from transportation professionals using targeted questionnaires. We drew inferences from the information collected and then presented our recommendations. Sustainable transport in our context. We looked at the Sustainable Development Goals concerned with and affected by transport. So we have good health and well-being, affordable and clean energy, industry, innovation and infrastructure, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. We identified a number of hindrances to sustainable transportation in Trinidad and Tobago. The national transport policies are lacking and urgent updating is required to address the current issues. There are conflicting roles as transportation planning, transportation demand management, and public transit management are carried out disjointedly. These are also largely influenced by politics, economics, and traffic reduction. Measurable performance indicators need to be defined for monitoring and evaluation of the system. And while I say this, the Joint Select Committee has made recommendations for performance indicators for PTSC from as far back as 2015, but these have not been adopted. There is irresponsibility on the part of the population as they are accustomed to large subsidies from the government, and preserving resources is not a prime concern. The function of the priority bus route is to prioritize public transport. However, there is limited access to maxi taxi drivers, while the bus route remains accessible to single occupancy vehicles with permits. The road network expansion, while it reduces congestion, does not necessarily support more sustainable forms of transport. We believe that the focus should be on moving people and goods rather than moving vehicles. A lack of monitoring has also been identified as a hindrance, as indicators for determining transportation sustainability are not being measured. This begs the question, have they been identified? And again, whose responsibility is it? And when we look at verification, there are constraints of data availability in effectively measuring progress. And somehow the cost of these exercises always takes precedence over the sustainability effects. Addressing those hindrances, of course, would require the involvement of dedicated professionals. And the tool that we have developed aims to assist by providing a means of monitoring, reporting, and verifying the sustainability progress. In developing the framework, the literature suggests that you employ criteria that can be measured and evaluated. You want to use balanced indicators that reflect the system's objectives. The perspectives, assumptions, and limitations of these indicators must be understood, and we are of the opinion that the adoption of national, regional, and internationally established indicators would make the framework more applicable. We therefore developed a framework that is impact-based, hierarchal, and satisfies the triple bottom line of economy, environment, and society. We also developed definitions for the requirements to assist the user of the framework. We have the economic requirement, which assesses the current and future states of the transportation system with respect to economic growth. We have the environmental requirement, which focuses on the extraction of resources for input into the transportation system and the resulting outputs that may pose threats to human health and the environment. And we have the social requirement, which explores the aspects of everyday living that can be affected by the operations within the system, and these can also impact relationships among people and social institutions. In the data collection and analysis, we made use of an electronic questionnaire where the respondents used ranking and Likert scales to comment on the suitability and importance of each of the criteria and indicators presented. They offered their professional opinions on the suitability of the framework and made recommendations for improvement. The target audience comprised transportation professionals with varying years of experience, from which we had a 78.6% response rate. We conducted statistical analysis, from which we used the absolute deviation as a measure of consensus, and we also made formal requests to government ministries to obtain the framework inputs. Here we have the importance weighting on each sustainability requirement and criterion as obtained from the questionnaires. So we see here that the social requirement was deemed more important than the environmental and economic requirements. Under the social requirement, the criteria of accessibility and mobility was weighted higher than safety. Under the environmental requirement, the criteria of pollution was weighted higher than energy efficiency, then followed by energy source. And under the economic requirement, we find that the infrastructure criteria was weighted higher than the market health and fuel price. Here we introduce the transportation sustainability framework. The indicators are on the far right and they are color coded. So those highlighted in green, we were able to obtain values for 2018. Those highlighted in yellow, we were able to obtain values prior to 2018. And those highlighted in red had no information available at the time, and measures would have to be developed to obtain that information. We asked the transportation professionals, do you think the sustainability framework would be useful in your area of work? The results came in and 10 of the 11 respondents said yes, while one responded with a maybe. The professionals saw potential applications, like determining the overall status of the transportation system as it relates to sustainability, setting targets for improvements to the transportation system, assessing the suitability of proposed alternatives, and making decisions about investments in the transport sector. In summary, the framework has 3 requirements, 9 criteria, and 22 indicators. It is intended for use by decision makers and planners both locally and internationally. It is intended to measure, report, and monitor sustainability progress, and its AHP structure will allow for modeling and multi-criteria decision-making applications. We have concluded that the 22 indicators can be evaluated to explore the effects of emerging policy and planned projects on the system's sustainability. The framework can be used primarily as a guide in informing of the requirements for the sustainability of the transportation system, and can also play an integral role in the evaluation of alternative solutions to transportation problems while guiding the initiatives of the Ministry of Works and Transport. The recommendations listed have been presented by local transportation professionals, but our argument is that we need to find more creative ways to apply those recommendations with the end goal of sustainability. Other recommendations emerging from our research is the need to develop a vehicle charging station index for electric vehicle penetration that would help to avoid the chicken and egg conundrum, to use the framework for quantitative feedback on sustainability progress, and to revise and test existing policy incentives to enhance their contribution to sustainability. We present our list of references, and we thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. We'll start with the questions.
Yeah, we can.
How applicable is your research to other Caribbean islands who have different economies, culture, and transport infrastructure? And there's a part 2. What parameters within the framework do you think would be most common and easily applicable to Caribbean islands?
Could you just repeat the first part of the question for me?
Sure. How applicable is your research to other Caribbean islands who have different economies, culture, and transport infrastructure?
The intention for future research is actually to look at the how the framework would fit into these other cultures. The research was limited to Trinidad, but it is the intention to expand to the other countries.
Okay.
And the second part?
What parameters within the framework do you think would be most common and easily applicable to Caribbean islands?
I think the entire framework would be applicable to the Caribbean islands. That was the intention when it was being developed. The information that was gathered, like the sustainability indicators, information is usually presented for all of the islands, and the information should also be collected by the different government ministries. So I think it would be applicable all over the Caribbean.
Thank you. We have another question which has several parts. Sustainability requires decision-making by key decision makers who are often policymakers and politicians. Do you consider the variables and their importance weighting that these individuals may consider and how they may differ or be influenced by the experts?
Yes, I acknowledge that the professionals are not always the ones making decisions, but we believe that the professionals should be the ones guiding the decision making. So I was not able to get their opinions on the framework, but perhaps it's something we can consider, either that or to push for the transportation professionals to be the one influencing the decisions as opposed to the politicians.
Okay, we have final question. What are your views on using discrete event simulations to measure indicators like travel times and resource utilization of transportation systems? They have a part to it, but you can answer that first.
It is something that can be applied as long as we can get the information to work with. That was one of the issues we had with conducting the research, in that the data was not always available for the things we would want to consider. So as long as the information is available, then yes, simulations would give us a better idea of how these indicators would affect sustainability.
Okay, the other part of the question is, would it be applicable to this research for quantitative feedback?
Well, again, yes, definitely, as long as we can get the data to work with.
Thank you very much. I think that's all for you for this afternoon. Professor Ray, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Kohan Dolcy. It's a great presentation and very valuable work for the region and the world also. It has a lot of new information. Appreciate it.